Hi, I'm Nicholas McGurr, author of The Afterlife and host for Stories in a Cemetery. You can find all my fiction works with themes of the afterlife on nicholasmcgurr.com. That's NicholasMcGirr.com. As a writer, I do research, and that research is more than likely inside a haunted location or a cemetery. Like you, I'm curious about the afterlife, and always looking for a new topic for my next book. I hope you enjoy this episode of my research as much as I did in using it for my fiction works. Let's get into today's story in the cemetery. Hey guys, welcome to episode 18. We've made it this far, so if you've been listening along, I'm really excited about this episode. And first and foremost, let me say happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever it is you're celebrating. I hope that you are doing it with loved ones and you are enjoying this holiday season. I have to say, since I've been living in South Carolina for 7 years, without any snow, it never really truly feels like Christmas. So for some of you that are listening from up north and you are hating the snow right now, and I know some of you are getting quite a bit of it, just take it in for me. And just know that I actually miss a good snow scene from time to time to actually write in the peaceful quiet of a good heavy snowfall. That's the writer in me, guys. It's not the ghost hunter for sure. The ghost hunting, of course, I need the South Carolina weather in order to do this year round. Just a couple housekeeping notes, guys, before we get started on our topic of the week. First and foremost, let me say that there are Stories in a Cemetery ghost hunting experience tickets still left for this weekend. So if you are in town or you're just a local and you want to go ghost hunting with me, make sure you check out charlestoncavaliertours.com. I will have links in the show notes. And of course, I'm going to be taking Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off from giving tours. I do have some family coming into town. So that also means that the Stories in a Cemetery podcast will also be going dark next week. There will not be an episode next Friday. So just with some family in town, it's hard enough to get some quiet time to do these recordings. With that said, I want to tell you that the first week of January, as promised, we are going to do another episode based on Byron Price's The Secret, a treasure hunt. And I have invited Brian McFarland of Charleston Cavalier Tours back on the show for a 1-hour special. And that'll be the first Friday of January, which I believe is January 5th. We've also decided to make sure that those episodes are for the Buy Me a Coffee patrons. And that will be exclusive to the Buy Me a Coffee patron page. Head on over to buymeacoffee.com. For just $1, a one-time patronage. There's no sign-up needed. You can drop $1 in the coffee pot, and you can catch those episodes on a monthly basis. So, merch is still underway. We are still deciding on placement and colors of the t-shirts. And of course, with this being the holiday season, there hasn't been a whole lot of time for adding new things to our plate over here at Stories in a Cemetery. So we are working on those, and those should be up, I'm hoping, by the end of January. Of course, I will make a huge announcement for that. All right, end of housekeeping notes. Let's get into today's topic. The topic, guys, is the Wagener building. The Wagener building, and most of us, let's face it, if we were to see this originally, or if you've looked at it already on my website, probably pronounced it the Wagener building, because we are Americans, most of us that are listening to the show. I do get some international listeners, and thank you, international listeners. I appreciate you. But Americans, we would look at this and we would say it's the Wagener building. And even on the front of the building actually has Wagener. So it is Wagener. So if you wanted to do your own research, make sure you have it spelled correctly, and your search will be a little bit more fruitful. The Wagener building is on East Bay Street. The cool thing about this is that it is actually part of my Stories in a Cemetery interactive ghost hunting experience, which means we do stop at this building, and we don't go inside, but we do get some readings, and we use the spirit box outside of this building. I've been able to catch some interesting finds. But first and foremost, you guys know that I always give the history, a little bit of background on the building or location before I start diving into the paranormal pieces of things, so that way I can kind of clue things together, kind of the same way I'm working on Byron Price's The Secret. The story is pretty basic. It's almost like a ghost tale or urban legend with this whole thing. And you can hear this story on pretty much any ghost walk or ghost tour downtown Charleston. It's not one where people actually point at the building and say, the Wagener building is haunted. It doesn't look haunted. It actually is a beautiful building. But the story goes a little something like this. It's the story of George Poirier. George inherited his father's businesses, with the Wagener building being included, and it was actually part of the Poirier cotton business. The problem with this is that Poirier actually inherited his father's money as well as his business, but he wasn't raised to actually manage a business. He was kind of a kid with a silver spoon in his mouth, and then all of a sudden he's handed this big giant industry and was expected to manage it and keep the family's legacy going. The other issue that was happening during this time was that the boll weevil, it's a kind of a beetle, you could say it's an insect, it's an ugly little bug, but it was eating away at the cotton crops that were in South Carolina. Like, it hit us pretty hard. So Poirier was actually spending his father's money. He wasn't managing his dad's business partners very well, and this bug was now invading all of his crops. So he needed a way to kind of get out of the business and figure out a way to pay off some of his debts. So he made a deal with the British in order to get rid of the last bit of the cotton that he had that wasn't infested with these boll weevils. Now, he was already depressed because he was losing his mind with trying to keep everything afloat that his father used to do. But the last deal with the British, they loaded up the ships with the cotton, and from the third floor of the Wagener building, he was able to watch the ship actually leave the port and head out to sea. Now, the story goes is that there was somebody a little too close to the cotton with a pipe on the ship, and all of the cotton caught fire, which then put the ship on fire. And as the men were jumping off of the ship, Poirier had his last straw. Now he had the shame of losing his father's last bit of stock to a fire. The story is that he took all the furniture in his office and he piled it all up, and he put his captain's chair. I don't know why the captain's chair is so significant, but it's always in that story. Put the captain's chair on the top, and he climbed this pile of furniture and then hung a noose, and he hung himself. It is also said that the first person to find him was the newsboy the next morning when he went down to the East Bay corner to sell his newspapers. But there was a broken window on the third floor, which caused some of the birds to come in to start pecking away at the swinging corpse before anybody even found him. So, of course, this makes for an awesome ghost story on a ghost tour. There's no access to the third floor from any kind of passageway of going on a tour or just kind of checking things out downtown. Like, you can't just walk in and go up to the third floor to go check things out. But since then, there's been a lot of businesses that were in this particular location, and it's kind of under renovation right now. I actually went there just a few days ago to see if I can capture any more evidence for today's episode. Of course, there was some construction crew inside working. It was in a restricted area. I wasn't allowed inside, so I just kind of paced around the building several times waiting for evidence to come through, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. But there's also some speculation of if George Poirier is actually the ghost that haunts the Wagener building. So we're going to get into that as well. So guys, let's take a quick break, and we will be right back. And we're back. Thanks again, guys, for allowing me to put sponsors in the middle of the show. It definitely helps move things along. So we were starting to talk about some of the paranormal evidence that's actually at the Wagener building, and we started with there were some other businesses there. So it was a brewery, some restaurants, different things along the way, and some of the stories are pretty simple. On a stormy night, you can see a swinging corpse from the window. Other business owners have claimed that there have been really cold and drafty spots when the air conditioning wasn't on and untraceable of where it originated from, which is super interesting. Cold spots are always fun. And there's also claims that the furniture will stack itself with a captain's chair on top. Now, I'm not disregarding any of these claims. Of course, I haven't seen it firsthand to be able to verify that. Of course, they're all on stories that I found online from some of the owners. Again, this is where some of the haunting stuff comes from. When you're looking for haunted locations, you have to start online and kind of work your way to the location itself to see what you can capture. Now, my evidence is pretty simple. The evidence that I have found while on tours with my guests are some EMF spikes from time to time, especially around the doors that are on the corner of East Bay Street. But every time I go to that door, there are usually some EMF spikes. Now, when I did my pacing around the building, I was able to at least look inside the building, even though it was restricted, and I didn't see any kind of equipment that would have been causing any EMF spikes in that specific corner. But I have had EMF spikes along the front of the building as well. So that always kind of brings things to light. Whenever I get an EMF detection, that kind of makes me want to investigate more. First, I always debunk the EMF to make sure there's no lights or I'm not standing on an electrical grid or anything of that nature so that I can validate the actual EMF reading. The other thing is I had the Spirit Box app working for me, and it came up with several different terms during my tours. The first one that comes up is under the chair. The word chair obviously being the focus. Now, under the chair, I don't know if he was trying to get underneath the chair when he was hanging himself, if we're going to go along with the George Poirier story, but it just kind of struck a chord that I received this phrase when I was near this specific building. Insects itching is the next one. Now, I did a little bit of research just to find out if the boll weevil actually can cause itching. Of course, we all are probably itching right now just thinking about bugs. But the point being is, could this cause a rash or anything like that? But it can cause rashes and massive itching if somebody is allergic to the beetle. That I found also very interesting, even though the boll weevil only comes up as part of eating the crops. So my theory is that if the cotton was being stored in the back of the building in the warehouse portion and some boll weevils were there, then it's possible that somebody was coming through telling us that the insects were itching. Just an interesting, it might be a stretch, but at the same token, it all kind of made sense when I started piecing all of this together. Now, when I went there just a few days ago, and I had the Spirit Box working, it gave me a name of Elias. I've never seen this name come through before, and it gave me some other names too that I also researched, but this was the only one that I found that actually had a connection. So I want to just stop here for a second because I didn't stumble across this when I did my original research, and I don't know why it didn't pop up, but I found an excellent article from an author, Richard Fowler, called Nothing New Under the Sun. And it looks like he was starting to do a lot of the same research that I'm doing for Stories in a Cemetery. But he came up with a theory. And the theory is very unique because what I found in my research was a lot of ghost stories and ghosts of the South and those kind of mentalities when I was doing this. Now, if you've listened to episode 16 with Byron Price's The Secret episode, you know that I'm working off of a totally different verse than everybody else, and I'm going off the beaten path. And this is what intrigued me about Fowler's theory, is that he has gone completely off the path, but he has found a link, not a web link, but an actual link between stories where this could have made sense. Now, he comes up with this story about Washington White Wilden. Now, the interesting about this is that Washington White Wilden was the son of Elias Wilden. So again, I got some clues that are proving some validity. Now I'm going to read his theory to you because it's super interesting, because he's piecing all of these clues together to make sure his story is working. It's not that he's making this stuff up. He's taking the story of Poirier and putting all of the elements of the story together that actually have the exact same elements of the story and theory that he's come up with. So from his website, it's called the Charles Scribbler. Charles Scribbler. I'll put it in the show notes. It's actually kind of hard to read because it doesn't say Charleston. It says Charles T. Scribbler, if that makes it easier. Anyway, the theory reads, the Wagener building has a ghost on its third floor, we are told, crackling with light and leaving cold zones here and there. There was no George Poirier, but I think a case could be made for Washington W. Wilden becoming involved with the merchants who dwelt there in 1886. There is no evidence that I know of to support any of this, but even that can be explained. The vagaries of the business world, past and present, I admit, are a mystery to me, so I'm not even going to try to delve into all that here. All we need know is that Wilden could have worked out some kind of deal with the Wageners and believed he was on the road to salvation. Unfortunately, on August 31st of that very year, a huge earthquake struck Charleston, and I'm going to speculate that it somehow destroyed the deal. The Wageners found themselves in a bind and decided to back out since no formal papers had yet been signed. I visualize a confrontation between the two parties in mid-September. An argument flared and became emotional. Seeing his last chance for solvency slipping away, Wilden felt suddenly overwhelmed and suffered a paralytic stroke right there in the third-floor offices of the Wagener building. Now, to read the full article, I'm going to again put the link in the show notes, but the name Elias coming up with this specific story and somebody else researching the very same building and trying to find the ghost, and he's absolutely right. I'm going to agree with Fowler here, where there's nowhere anywhere that actually showed me any pictures of a George Poirier or any research when I was going through the Low Country Digital Library. Nothing that came up with the name Poirier that came up in Charleston. George Poirier. Nothing came up at all. So he's absolutely right. The fact that he stumbled across this story and put together a theory of how things may have gone down it is very... I admire the guy because he's doing what we do with some of our treasure hunts. And that's very admirable. So hats off to you, Mr. Fowler. I agree with you. I think you're onto something here for sure. Now, I will say that when I was going around the building, I did come up with the word rice on my spirit box as well during the same time period that Elias came up. So I don't know if there was any rice dealings of that time or if it's just part of the hoax of the game of the app. Again, if you've been listening to the show, you know that I use an app called Ghost Detector, and it is meant to be a party game style hoax app, but there is some legitimacy to what this app actually gives us. It is more active when I'm in haunted locations or alleged haunted locations and gives me words that are actually relevant to the stories that are there. So go back a couple of episodes and listen to some of my evidence, and you can see that. But again, with Mr. Fowler's theory and the name Elias Wilden coming up, I have to think that there's some validity there. Is the story of George Poirier a great story? Absolutely. And I think we should continue telling it. However, I think we should continue telling it as that's not really the true story, but here's a good ghost story to tell on our tours and who knows, maybe even on Christmas Eve, because there are traditions that tell ghost stories on Christmas Eve. So what's in the future for the Wagener building, you're probably asking, because I did see the construction site it was a construction site when I visited. There are plans for an upscale restaurant that's yet to be determined, at least from the research that I found. And the other floors are going to remain wide open for wedding reception type areas, including the rooftop. So if you're not from Charleston and you don't know much about Charleston, we are a huge wedding venue for folks all over the United States. And people come straight to Charleston to have their wedding. And of course, there needs to be venues for the receptions. So it makes perfect sense that something so close to the water and so close to Waterfront Park, a beautiful part of the city, that would be a great rental venue place for wedding receptions. And I'd be interested to see which restaurant actually goes in there and if they come up with some of the paranormal activity as the other places did. And I think I may have forgotten to mention that when the brewery was there, they actually have claims that the taps would turn on all by themselves, just spilling beer everywhere. I'll be interested to see, and I'll have to make some friends with whoever's there. And if they haven't heard this already when they open up their doors, I'm sure when they do the research on the building that they will come across this podcast and the blog post for the Wagener building. So guys, that wraps up the show for this week. I wish you a very happy holiday. Again, whatever it is that you're celebrating. Head over to buymeacoffee.com/Nicholas McGurr, and you can drop $1 in a coffee pot and then get all of those bonus episodes. I haven't decided yet if I'm actually going to do a regular episode in that same week or not. Guys, get on the Stories in the Cemetery Facebook page and let me know what you think, if you want another regular episode or if we should go straight into the sponsored episode only. I'm pretty sure I know what that answer is, but let's kind of take a quick poll on that. There's still tours available from now until December 23rd. And guys, don't forget to check out the pictures that I posted of the building and some of the older picture from the Low Country Digital Library that I posted up on the blog post. So head over to nicholasmcgurr.com, and of course the link straight to this specific blog post will be there as well. Guys, have an awesome Christmas, and I will talk to you guys in 2 weeks. I almost forgot, guys. Make sure you leave reviews on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, or CastBox. And of course, you can leave me a voicemail right here through Anchor. And who knows, if your ghost story, if you have a great ghost story, I will post it right on the show. Leaving reviews on all of these websites that you are already listening to your podcast through only helps Stories in a Cemetery reach more people. So guys, that could be your Christmas gift to me and help out Stories in a Cemetery reach more people. So share these episodes and make sure you leave a rating or comments on any of those podcatching sites. That's Apple, Stitcher, Anchor, and CastBox. I know there's a lot of you listeners out there. I see what my metrics are every week. So guys, I will see you soon. Have a great holiday. Thanks so much for listening to today's Story in a Cemetery. Be sure to check out the show notes with pictures and bonus audio sections on nicholasmcgurr.com. As you know, I'm a writer, and now you have another story that inspires me to write my fiction works. Be sure to share this episode on your social media or leave me comments on the Stories in a Cemetery Facebook page. I'll see you next time with another Story in the Cemetery.